Hello, everyone. My name is Louis Sanville, and today I'm going to talk to you about muted group theory. Now, I just want to ask you a few questions before we get started. Was there a certain point of time where you had to change the way you said something or you had to do a certain thing in order to accommodate other people? Was there a certain point of time that you expressed your feelings only to realize that no one was listening to you? If you had had these experiences, then you were a part of a muted group, and this is what this presentation is about. So basically, I'm just going to give you a general overview of what muted group theory is. I'm just going to talk about what it is, the history behind it, and some other tidbits on it. So without further ado, here it is, muted group theory. Now, first things first, let's define muted group theory. Now, when you first hear the word muted group, what do you think about? Do you think about the people who don't have a voice in society? If that's the case, then you're on the right track. But just remember that just because they are a muted group doesn't mean that they're not completely silent. My textbook, which is called A First Look at Communication Theory, defines the muted group as people belonging to low power groups who must change their language when communicating publicly, thus their ideas are often overlooked. So this means that subordinate groups have to speak the same language as the dominant groups in order to gain an advantage. Now let's get into the history of the muted group theory. You see this man right here? His name is Edwin Ardner. He is a social anthropologist for Oxford University, and he was the first to propose that women were muted groups. He first proposed this in his essay Belief in the Problem of Women in 1968. In it, he wrote of his research that he noticed many ethnographers at the time left out the perspectives of half of the world's population, i.e., women. So he basically realized that there was a lack of representation of women within this research. And at first, he believed that this lack of representation was unique within this kind of research. But then he began to realize that these women were not fully muted, but hushed by society. So basically, he came to the realization that the stories and the beliefs and the values of these women were not being told, that they were being lost. And rightfully so, he found this appalling. So he and his wife Shirley collected all of this research and published their findings in 1968. Eventually, it wouldn't be long before a professor at the University of Illinois will expand on Edwin and Shirley's research. Her name is Cheris Kamare. She began her study in 1974, and it involved cartoons that depicted women as vague and flowery compared to their muscular, superior, and intelligent male counterparts. Thus, she came to the conclusion that language is man-made, meaning that men construct a language. And since it was constructed by men, they know how to use it. Now, Sheris also came up with three assumptions that would create the basis of muted group theory. The first assumption is that women perceive the world differently from men because of men and women's different experiences and activities rested in division of labor. The second assumption is that males, as the dominant group of society, make the female's point of view less competent. Not only this, but they control over language that produce an abundance of derogatory words for women and their speech patterns. And the third assumption is that to be a part of society and to dominate, women must act similar to those of the dominant group in terms of their perception towards things. Now let's compare and contrast feminist standpoint theory with muted group theory. Feminist standpoint theory is a branch of standpoint theory, which is a point of view or an attitude towards a particular issue from a perspective. Now, feminist standpoint theory, on the other hand, according to Julia T. Woods, would argue that, quote, what we learn from women's lives not only provide insight into the lives of women, but also that those insights allow new understandings of the practices of the dominant group. Now, in other words, we're exclusively getting the point of view of the women. So what does feminist standpoint theory have in common with muted group theory? Three things. The first thing that they have in common is that they both acknowledge the operation of power relations in cultural life. The second thing they have in common is that both value the lives and the knowledge of subordinate groups. And the third thing they have in common is that both are political, although in different ways. But now let's get to what makes them different. First, muted group theory focuses exclusively on language, a site where power relations are manifested, while feminist standpoint theory exclusively focuses on knowledge and the way of knowing that start from women's everyday activities and lives, which is structured by power relations. Second, muted group theory assumes that the likelihood of one's voice being muted is linked rather directly to whether one belongs or to a subordinate group such as women, whereas feminist standpoint theory has not drawn a straight line between being a woman and having a feminist standpoint. And finally, the goals of these two theories are vastly different. While muted group theory calls attention to muted voices and reforming language so that women's experiences from women's perspective are fully represented, feminist standpoint theory aims to develop a method for constructing knowledge that is based on insight arising from women's experiences and learn from knowledge that arises from women's social experiences. So now that you figured that technology has advanced at such a rapid pace that there will be these mediums of expression that these subordinate groups could use to get their voices heard. That is true to a certain extent. Even though there are these new mediums of expressions, these voices are still being muted. Why? You would probably blame the gatekeepers for that. Now, gatekeepers, according to my textbook of First Look at Communication Theories, is that gatekeepers are editors and other arbiters of culture who determine which books, essays, poetry, plays, film scripts, etc. will appear in the mass media. So think of gatekeepers as this publishing company. You want to send them a manuscript of the book you're trying to write, and you give it to them. If they like what they have read, they'll publish it. If they don't, they'll give it back to you and say, sorry, it doesn't fit our qualifications. Now, in Cremare's case, these gatekeepers are men. In fact, according to Cremare, women were locked out of the publishing business until 1970. Women lacked influence on mass media and were not often found properly represented in history. So I find it very likely that the history of women that we've been told in school were secondhand accounts written by men. Now, this kind of misrepresentation is something we're trying to undo today. Well, not necessarily undo, but to correct. But until then, we can always do this. That's right, speak out in private. Now I know what you're thinking, and don't worry, it's doable. In fact, Kumara states that females are likely to find ways to express themselves outside the dominant public modes of expression used by males in both their verbal convictions and their nonverbal behavior. And one of the most popular ways to do that is to find these back channel routes. These routes include diaries, gossip, folklore, letters, etc. Kamare likes to call them the female subversion that runs beneath the male orthodoxy, which makes perfect sense because, according to Kamare, men usually find it more troubling trying to understand women than the other way around. In other words, males are so used to their own form of language that they don't even know what the women are saying. Thus, it's comforting for women in any other subordinate group to talk to each other through their own language. And that's it. Thank you all so much for taking this opportunity to watch this video. I hope you all will walk away learning something from this video. Now, personally, I don't think I'm the best teacher in the world, but I do try to give people my perspective on certain things, especially on theories such as this. So again, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. And until we meet again, my name is Louis Sandville.